Oh boy, man. This is sweet. So a few days ago, you might have seen here on the YouTube channel, we made a video talking about the idea that Patrik Allvin letting Nikita Zadorov go to Boston may have been a mistake. And of course, the season is beginning, it's brand new, so a lot of these conversations, a lot of these narratives, they're just fetuses right now. The games haven't even really begun yet in a big capacity. We're only less than 10% of the way into the season. But essentially, 4 days ago when that video was made, we had been talking about how the Vancouver Canucks D-core hasn't really been the best, and even in the Chicago game, you could say the Canucks dominated. Yes, they won 6-3, but the defense still wasn't particularly amazing. You could chalk that up to a diversion of talent from last year's roster onto this year's roster. Not even to mention that Derek Forbort ended up leaving the team, but having a D-core with Hughes, Hronek, Susie Myers, and then whomever else, Eric Bronstrom, who admittedly is pretty good, and then you also have the other guys rotating around there too, Noah Juleson, Mark Friedman, etc., etc. It's a downgrade from what the Canucks had last year with Ian Cole, who for most of the regular season was a very dependable and solid option, who only just kind of disappointed in the second round of the playoffs against Edmonton, and you also had Nikita Zadorov, who, in his own right, came alive in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. He was fantastic. Either way, we had discussed in that video a few days ago that maybe letting Nikita Zadorov go and changing up the dynamic and lessening the depth of the defense core was a bit of a mistake by Patrik Allvin. Well, it turns out we are here going over the exact opposite in this video because we're heading over onto the R Canucks subreddit and reading a post made by Internet Bear. We are 8 games into the regular season, and the Boston Bruins subreddit is already complaining about Nikita Zadorov's contract. They want Debrusk and Danton Heinen back. Oh, how the turns tables. This is a screenshot included in the post from the R Boston Bruins daily discussion thread from a few days ago, I'm going to assume, and let's go out there and read some of the comments on this. I have issues with Nikita Zadorov's contract, absolutely both the term and the money. He's taken away a lot from the pool of space that could have gone towards trying to improve our offense, but I think the Korpisalo contract is also deserving of similar criticism. The whole point of moving on from the tandem was to pay Swayman like a full-time starter, not only because he would carry a starter's workload during the regular season, but also to prevent multiple millions from essentially sitting on the bench in the playoffs. Tying up an additional $3 million in his salary, even with Ottawa retaining, is a problem even if goalie Bob somehow turns him into a carriage. And this had 10 upvotes on the Boston Bruins daily discussion thread. A reply from SweatyAD440 says this: I think it is kind of frustrating to look at both of those contracts and see that it's basically the same money as Debrusk and Heinen ended up being. You probably don't get the first-round pick back from the Sens without taking on Korpisalo, but we're in win-now mode anyway, so who cares? Our forward group would have been so much better. And this post had 7 upvotes as well. And maybe if we had made this video 4 days ago, on the same day we made that Nikita Zadorov signing mistake video, I may have had a different assessment of this. Because if you think about it, the money and how everything works out, Nikita Zadorov and Korpisalo roughly equaling what Danton Heinen and Jake Debrusk ended up being for Vancouver, yeah, that's a really good win. I mean, think about what Boston Bruins fans are seeing on the ice right now. Go over to the daily face-off line combinations for Boston, and right now, Nikita Zadorov is listed as a top 4 defenseman. And if you look at the minutes, he's averaging 18 minutes time on ice per game. That's roughly in the wheelhouse as to what he's averaged throughout the rest of his career. But the question is he a top 4 caliber guy? You can say that in the playoffs for Vancouver, he was playing like a top 4 caliber guy with all the points and all the goals that he had scored. That was awesome. But is he effective enough and consistent enough defensively to be labeled as a proper top 4 option, especially for the money that he's making? $5 million a year. Part of the reason why I thought it was an awesome thing for Vancouver to have Zadorov is because it split the load evenly between the left-handed defensemen on the team. You had Quinn Hughes, who would get the bulk of the minutes because of course he's the number one guy, but then pairs 2 and 3 would have equal line distribution because Zadorov and Soucy would be good enough to balance everything out. You didn't need to play Soucy more than Zadorov, you didn't need to play Zadorov more than Soucy. They could play the same minutes. And same could be said with Tyler Myers and Ian Cole also being rotated on either the opposite side, or if you wanted to switch Zadorov over to the right, you could do that too. There was even the Nikita Zadorov and Tyler Myers pairing that we had seen for a little bit too, the Twin Towers pairing, which, I mean, look, the name still kind of confuses me because it's such a ridiculous thing to call a hockey pairing. But Nikita Zadorov playing on the Boston blue line alongside of Brandon Carlo, in theory, Carlo should be able to hold his own and be a top mover. But for Nikita Zadorov, it is interesting to me to see how Bruins fans are talking about his contract as being some sort of a negative add-on to the Joonas Korpisalo deal, which is obviously going to be seen as a bad one because Korpisalo, I'm sorry, he's not great. And you get yourselves a dollar amount that is roughly equal to Danton, Heinen, and Jake Debrusk. This is where you start talking about what these guys have been doing for Vancouver. Jake Debrusk, initially starting out as a winger for Elias Pettersson, he found himself on a different line with Miller and Besser recently. While I do still think he's trying to fully find his ground and establish himself as a primary Vancouver Canucks scoring threat, the fact is, Jake Debrusk is under a point per game this season with 4 points in 6 games. That's definitely not bad. He's on pace for a 55-point year, which would be better than what he did last year. And this is just him barely getting his toes wet as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. As for Danton Heinen, he had scored 2 goals in the prior game. He's looking super good on that line with Kiefer Sherwood and Teddy Bluger, and I don't think any Vancouver Canucks fan is going to disagree with him being a valuable pickup, especially as a local guy. There's a great story there. Langley, BC, he was playing around in Surrey and Richmond, everywhere else. I mean, he's familiar with the area, so obviously there's an affinity there. But both him and Debrusk, they add some incredible depth and scoring options to this Vancouver Canucks team. So heading into what is going to be the rest of the season with a stacked forward core, sure, it sucks to lose out on a stable defenseman like Zadorov, who would have been a great add in the middle to bottom pairings of the lineup. But at the same time, for whatever dollar amount it is the Vancouver Canucks would have wanted to use to get him, $4-point-something million a year, you could have said, do you want to pay that much money for a guy who's technically going to be a third pairing guy? Would you rather shell that money out to a forward or two that could be utilized in a pretty versatile role, playing evenly spread out minutes and being an effective point producer on top of that? Now, again, it's so early. This entire conversation about Zadorov just 4 days ago was completely flipped around in its head on this YouTube channel. So maybe 4 days later, Nikita Zadorov's going to have 2 hat tricks in a row for the Bruins and everybody's going to be saying he's amazing, and maybe Jake Debrusk and Danton Heinen stop scoring and they're looking super bad on Saturday. They don't do anything, and then we're like, okay, yeah, it was a bad decision to get them. Like, hockey stories can change so quickly, but it's interesting for me how right now it seems like Boston Bruins fans are kind of regretting that Nikita Zadorov deal. I'll leave a link in the description to the Reddit post. I also wanted to dive into some of the comments here before we end off this video. The first one from Coin Talk says this: I love it. You can't blame Nikita Zadorov though. He took the best moment of his career and fan love in Vancouver and signed an obscene contract in Boston. Will he live up to the hype? Probably not. Which version of Zadorov shows up in the playoffs? That is the question. Yeah, I think that is the real question. It's too early to say if he's gelling with Boston, but some people, once they get their payday, just do enough to the playoffs because no one wants to get hurt. I kind of miss the swagger the whole team had with Zadorov's mouth, though. Another reply says this: yeah, I was browsing through their sub after Nashville got their first win, and they're not happy. Last year, Jake Debrusk took 9 penalties, and they compared him to Zadorov, who already has 7 penalties in the past 7 games. They're calling him slow. Heinen will be missed because he was a Swiss Army knife for them and provides solid depth scoring. We basically traded Lindholm for Debrusk and Heinen, and then used Zadorov's salary cap space to fill out the depth everywhere else. The Bruins buy high on Zadorov, and even though I would have liked him at a lower price, the Canucks made the right decision. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this Nikita Zadorov buyer's remorse situation. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.